If you don't believe in miracles, then watch this video. There are some crashes in F1 that are beyond the ordinary, and luckily the driver survived. Did you know that Jules Bianchi was tragically on the receiving end of a terrifying Formula 1 accident which took his life? Well, that's not the focus of today's video, but in numerous horrific collisions throughout the history of Formula 1, some drivers have escaped death, and Bianchi wasn't one of them. Today's video will highlight drivers who managed to escape unharmed despite being in potentially fatal collisions. David Coulthard's string of collision crash 1998 Belgian Grand Prix. The British driver failed to win a single World Championship in 14 years of F1 racing. Now, would this shock the accident he escaped? Well, he had the unpleasant distinction of being the cause of the collisions. The 1998 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps began in severe weather. Mika Häkkinen, the McLaren driver, threw off the starting grid in a flash, leading the group that littered a strong spray upon those behind. With little sight, David lost control of his McLaren and smashed into the side barrier, causing his automobile to bounce off the wall and skidded onto the track right into the path of oncoming traffic. The result was absolute devastation. Cars collided, scattering debris in all directions. Detached vehicle tires bounced across the track, climbing as high as the adjacent stands.
They'll have to red flag this. Terrible. Oh, this is quite appalling.
In all, 13 cars were shattered in the chain reaction crash. Despite the scale of the accident, David was unhurt. Likewise, the others involved also walked away and drove on when the race resumed with a restart. Mark Webber high-speed crash 2010 European Grand Prix. A high-speed somersault by an airborne automobile is a typical scene in movies. However, it is far from frequent on an F1 circuit. Things were regular during the 2010 European Grand Prix in Valencia until something unusual happened on the 9th lap. Webber was traveling at 190 miles per hour and tailing Lotus driver Heikki Kovalainen down the straight, attempting to pass the Lotus driver into a tight right-hander. Kovalainen looked to brake hard, and with less than a second to respond, the Australian crashed into the back of the Lotus car. The hit was so fast that the nose of the Red Bull raised and the entire vehicle did a backflip and landed upside down, trapping Webber beneath the car. The vehicle slid over the tarmac and collided with the tire-laden side barricades.
Has a nice gap opening on the inside coming out of turn one, and Verstappen is back ahead of Charles Leclerc.
Everyone was stunned, hoping they had not just witnessed a terrible death. While it appeared impossible for a driver to avoid being crushed under his car upon collision, Webber emerged uninjured from his car's twisted wreckage. The feeling was similar to Jesus walking on water, an absolute miracle. While reflecting on the collision, Webber acknowledged his good fortune, saying, "Obviously, you become a little anxious when that occurs." Webber raced for the rest of the 2010 season, finishing third in the Drivers' Championship. Niki Lauda all-angle crash 1976 German Grand Prix. When we discuss the most hazardous incidents in F1 history, the event involving Niki Lauda is one eventful one that comes to mind. Lauda's Ferrari lost control and slammed into the metal barriers. The tremendous force of the impact sent the automobile back onto the track, right into the path of an incoming race car. His helmet had come off and he was stuck in his automobile in a blazing flame.
These cars up on top of the water and aquaplaning, so I think from a safety point of view, a normal start.
Other racers had to help him get out of the automobile. Lauda was severely burned on his head and face, had lung damage from breathing hazardous gases, and fell unconscious while being treated at the hospital. At that moment, it was uncertain if he would live. But after 40 days, Lauda was back behind the wheel like Lazarus and showed astounding tenacity. Despite missing 2 races while he was in hospital, this man who escaped death competed and was a serious title candidate. Niki finished 4th in his return race while using a modified helmet, disregarding the blood-stained bandages alongside his vision problems. Felipe Massa fall and smash crash 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix. The majority of automobile accidents involving injured drivers in competitive driving are the result of human error. Now and again, a bizarre accident results in serious injuries. Felipe Massa experienced exactly this at the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix. To everyone's surprise, he seemed to miss a turn while racing down a fast stretch in the second round of qualifying. He then proceeded to drive right into the tyre barriers. Later replays would support that he became disoriented when something visibly hit his helmet. A rear suspension breakdown on Rubens Barrichello's vehicle caused a spring to fall off and smash into Massa's helmet as he followed at 162 km/h, according to an FIA inquiry. Barrichello had been driving ahead of Massa at the time. After being transported to hospital, Massa underwent an urgent procedure near his left eye. The Brazilian's health quickly improved after being described as life-threatening but stable. However, a titanium plate had to be placed within his skull to recover racing-grade strength and stability. After making a full recovery, Massa relaunched his career in 2010 and began the season by placing second in Bahrain. Romain Grosjean's incredible fireball crash, 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix. Everyone was stunned by Romain Grosjean's crash at the Bahrain Grand Prix in 2020, and seeing the film still gives me shivers because it was one horrific sight. Grosjean's vehicle was severed in two after smashing through the barriers, and it instantly caught fire. For 27 seconds, Grosjean was stranded in flames with his foot immobilized. He managed to get his left leg free of his shoe and leapt outside.
Unbelievable.
It was terrifying to see Grosjean emerge from the collision engulfed in flames, even if his flame retardant suit averted any significant damage. He managed to survive with second-degree burns on his hands and a fractured ankle. Upon closer examination, it was discovered that his automobile struck the barrier with an estimated 67 Gs of force. How he survived is still a miracle to everyone. Some might say fate smiled upon him that day. Fernando Alonso mystery crash, 2015 pre-season testing. Pre-season testing in Formula 1 is often mundane, and aside from modifications to new car models, little genuinely remarkable happens. But Fernando Alonso was in for a fright during the 2015 pre-season testing. The Spanish double world champion hit a wall at 150 mph on day 4 of the winter testing at Circuit de Catalunya. He was unharmed and made it through. Alonso allegedly said, "My name is Fernando, I race karts, and I want to be a Formula 1 driver," when paramedics asked him who he was and what he did for a career when they arrived. It turns out that when Alonso awoke from the collision, he believed it was 1995 and that he was 13 years old. He couldn't recall making his F1 debut or winning world championships. However, Alonso would call this a fun story and refute the existence of the alleged case of retrograde amnesia. Despite medical advice to stop competing because a second collision may be catastrophic, Alonso returned to the track in the Malaysian Grand Prix after missing the season's first race in Australia. Robert Kubica massive accident, 2007 Canadian Grand Prix. With BMW Sauber, Kubica had a pretty successful season before the Canadian Grand Prix, but he was to get a reality check in the middle of the Canadian Grand Prix. His vehicle slammed into Jarno Trulli's Toyota on lap 27, causing it to drift onto the grass. Soon after striking a bump in the grass, the Sauber was in the air. Kubica was in the driver's seat waiting to see how the situation would play out with the car's nose up. His vehicle slammed into a wall head-on, slid over the track and into the path of approaching vehicles. Eventually, after hitting and rolling along the opposing wall, the automobile would come to a stop. Kubica's vehicle was traveling at 186 mph when it crashed into the barrier. The impact of the collision was so severe that it was determined that the Polish driver experienced a maximum G-force of 75 G. The nose of his automobile was destroyed, exposing his feet as it came to a stop on its side. Fortunately, Kubica just had a damaged ankle and a little concussion. Later, at a hospital, Kubica recalled the event and said he remembered almost everything and that he was fortunate to have avoided serious injury. What a stroke of luck. He missed the next US Grand Prix and competed again in the French Grand Prix, where he finished 4th. Sophia Flörsch horror crash, 2018 Macau Grand Prix. At the F3 Macau Grand Prix, German driver Sophia Flörsch lost control of her Van Amersfoort race car, clipped Chaussee Boy and was thrown into the air and onto a wall. While Suboy, who was also involved in the collision, was brought to the hospital and had surgery for her damaged back, Flörsch only suffered minor wounds. Which one of these accidents really gave you the chills and made you scream? Let us know in the comments.